Happy December and welcome back to the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. Last week, I interviewed Jenica Harrison and we talked all things standards-based grading, and she shared so many specific and practical tips for implementation. If you have not listened yet, go back and check out episode 106 before you go any further, especially if you are like me and knew really nothing about standards-based grading and you're like, this doesn't apply to me, I don't teach at that kind of school. I really think you can still learn so much from this conversation like I did. So go back and listen to that episode first. Now, I mentioned at the end of it that I knew I really wanted to have multiple perspectives on this because it's a hard topic, and the more we can learn, the better. I have a lot of learning to do, okay? So I'm so grateful to be able to bring on a more seasoned veteran teacher, way more than me, because I just think it really hits differently to think about making such a big shift in how you teach and how you assess when you've been teaching a certain way for a longer amount of time. So I was really, really thrilled when one of my internet friends, Boni Hamilton, and I call her one of my internet friends because we've been emailing and chatting back and forth for several years now. Boni has been such a cheerleader for me and truly encouraged me so much over the years to keep going. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for this woman. And so I was thrilled when she applied to come on the podcast to speak on this topic. And I'm just so grateful for her time and sharing her wisdom with us. So you don't know Boni like I do, so I want to introduce you to her. She came into education as a second career. And so she taught for 23 years before she retired in May, but she's already back in the classroom because she missed it so much. And during those 23 years, she spent 16 teaching middle school science and 7 teaching high school science in California. Also during that time, she was department chair and she helped develop a lab-driven life science program, which covered biology, environmental science, and AP environmental. So she has a ton of experience, and she also has experience doing both standards-based reporting and traditional grade reporting at the same time, which I think is crazy, but also very unique. And so she's going to share her experience in today's episode navigating both of those. And she really speaks a lot to the NGSS, which was really helpful for me to hear. And again, I feel like this is another conversation that really stretched me and stretched my thinking as an educator. I am just so grateful for her humility and honestly just her growth mindset. Like, our conversation really inspired me to stretch myself as a teacher in terms of what do I prioritize and how open-handed do I need to be with all that I do? Because I am a very rigid person. Y'all know I'm so type A. I'm all about a spreadsheet. I like to check things off a list. She just really challenged me, and I'm really thinking about things a lot differently. So I'm excited for you to hear from her. And she really speaks again to how to integrated the NGSS and standards-based grading are, and just has great wisdom about the importance of relationships with students and communication with parents. So I'm going to stop talking so you can hear from her. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Boni Hamilton. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Well, Boni, I'm thrilled you're here.
Thank you.
For listeners, Boni and I have been talking forever over email. Like, I feel like there are certain people that I feel like I know through our email correspondence, and I feel like I know you, and we celebrated your retirement, and then you had a fake retirement.
Well, it's so hard because I have such a passion for teaching. It's crazy where pretty much the minute I retired, I was looking for work. It was very bizarre, and I wanted work that involved students, and I wanted to work. Actually, one of my long-term goals was to work with baby teachers. And by that, I mean teachers in their first 5 years of whatever. And when you switch grade levels, you kind of start over in a lot of ways. So I'm thrilled to have this opportunity with you, Becca, because this whole issue of standards-based reporting and traditional, for ease of communication, traditional reporting, there's a big difference between them. And we have some pretty bad practices in the educational system. And it would be good that our teachers, the ones that are our audience today, understand the difference, know the difference, and be able to really explain it to their parents and their students. And I'd love for them to have a big takeaway of, oh, I got this. I can now really differentiate and explain what's going on here.
Well, I'm thrilled because I have no experience with this. And so I'm grateful to bring yours on for the listeners. So when in your career then was this introduced to you?
Did this happen?
Or was it required? Was it an option? Kind of tell us how it came to be for you.
Well, it was a requirement, and it was one of those requirements that the district basically does every year. They pop a new requirement on us. Everybody's familiar with that. Some new thing you need to learn, some new strategy, even though it may be an old strategy just revamped or whatever. So we were doing traditional report card grading. So that was your A, B, C, D, F. And it basically went the percentile was 59% was a fail.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially that was if you use percentages. So it broke down like that. So when I came into teaching, which was actually 2000, this is a second career for me, which is why I retired after 23 years. To some of you, you're going to think, wow, I'm 23 years old and I'm not stopping. I don't blame you. Because if I would have started in my early 20s, I would still be rolling, trust me. But we were teaching to standards. California had adopted standards. They were very old, but they were standards. The problems with them were that there were overall arching concepts, and then there were discrete facts, and there was no rhyme or reason. So standards-based was required. They called it basically rubricing, and pretty much everybody's familiar now, I think, with using rubrics and using them to really try to pull our biases out and say what things must this student do to show me that they have gotten this information and they know or gotten this skill or whatever. So they wanted us to go. This was the difficulty I faced, was they wanted a rubric of 1 to 4. And of course, we have 5 grades. And just like anybody else, I wanted to equate them. So then for me in my brain, then it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But it didn't really work that way, because 4 meant you have mastered the content or the skill. 3 meant you got it. You're okay. Mm-hmm. They called it proficient, but really I would have called proficiency 4, but whatever. I won't argue with their rubric right now. And then 2 was approaching. I'm going up to that standard. And 1 was I'm just really having a hard time with this. The equivalent I could give you today, we use, and teachers are going to be real familiar with this now, and that is mastery, proficiency, basic, below basic, and then far below basic. So pretty much those are the overall national standards, if you want to call them, in terms of how we rubric. And that's gotten very standardized. If your school is way behind on that, you may want to check it out, because it's pretty standardized in most states. I am based in California, but there are national teaching standards, and there are absolutely standards for teachers out there that you can look at, and they go across the board. It doesn't matter what state you're in. Anyway, I digress. So they said to us, you must do this rubricing and with your traditional report card. And they didn't even tell us how to do it. We started putting it on the same report. In other words, it was really trying to overlay or integrate right on top of the traditional. And wow, was that confusing.
And a lot of work.
A ton of work. We revamped these forms. I cannot even tell you, because you had to explain in terms of your rubric where your child was at as far as the content. And I was about 5 years into my career at this point, and I was teaching middle school, and I was teaching multiple grades. So I was teaching science, specific sciences. I was teaching physical science to eighth graders at that time, life science to seventh, and earth science to sixth graders. And it was a mess. We were a mess. We messed around with this for probably 3 years before we all just said, we need to just give them two different reporting pieces. They really don't align. You could try that. And parents will, in their brains, they're going to automatically say, my child is an A because they have a 4. And they're probably right. I mean, they probably are. And that's where the difficulty lies, because traditional reporting has so much more bias in it, because it includes behaviors, and it includes work ethic, and it includes personal discipline and self-control. All of those things we are building in our children. They don't have them automatically.
Right.
So whose standard are you going by when we're speaking of standards as far as behaviors, and how much does that affect their overall grade? And sometimes it would affect it a lot. So where the standards has helped me is when I'm looking to what grade does my student really have in this course, especially at my finals, at my midterms and my final, I'm looking at the content, what they really understand from the content. And if I've been really diligent, and this takes a long time, folks, I'm going to tell you, this is not an overnight process. Takes a long time to build this. But if I am diligent about my rubrics throughout the year with their assignments, they will know exactly where they're at. And they will know also how it converts to a traditional grade. They'll know that they're a C student or that they're a B student. There won't be this huge surprise when they hit the final and they only do this much, or they do this much, whatever that is. So I find that the standards, if we follow them and we attempt to really teach to them, make sure that that's what that's the goal of our design, our curriculum design, then everything else kind of falls into place. I don't think traditional report cards should be held higher than standards-based. I think standards-based reporting is much more accurate. It's much more authentic. It's more honest. I can rubric a child who has been such a behavior problem with me, but I can rubric that child on a project, and that child will shine because we finally hit some kind of skills that he or she is really good at. So cool, they met those content standards. And it doesn't matter what their behavior was. So I think overall, explaining this to students as well and simplifying it. But basically, this test that I'm giving you, this assessment, is so I know what you know and what you don't know. Okay? Give it to me. Bring me your best stuff, because I need to know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. How am I going to fill those gaps in if you don't do that for me? And I have a rubric for the assessment. My team, I was biology. I was on the biology team, but I was also de facto department chair for a little while for all of our science team. And we all decided that we needed a screener. We needed an initial assessment that applied to every science that we gave to every student that entered our doors right at the beginning of the year. And the reasoning for that was to create a baseline, because we're professional learning communities. We were using PLC process. So we needed to create this baseline. I cannot tell you the hours we spent discussing what's a baseline in all sciences. So we had to get that worked down. And of course, keeping to our standards. These are the skills that they have to have. And here's where NGSS comes in and has been really marvelous. in 2013, when California adopted the standards, I knew they were coming in and I'd been reading the drafts and things like that. Well, I was all over it because I was so sick of tweaking my curriculum and teaching things that I mostly didn't. I did not teach things I didn't think were going to be helpful to them as they went forward. And I think that's my right as a teacher. But standards take your bias out of that. Standards say your student they will be able to do this. And it's very specific in science, I think. It's very specific in all the standards that I've been able to see. So as the lead for bio, and bio, generally we get all the freshmen. So we went hours and hours around, okay, narrow it down. These are the skills they have to have. What I was saying was the NGSS standards also brought in our S&Ps. So our science practices and our engineering practices, SEPs or whatever they are, but all of those skills. So that's really what we screened them on, because it made sense to us. Where are you in all these skills? Can you construct a graph? Can you read a graph?
Right.
Can you divide? I mean, there were just some can you read a thermometer, pictures of things like that? It was only a 7-question screener. But what it did for us as a department was it informed us of the overall level of the freshmen coming in. So every class gave it every year. Now that means that, yes, juniors and seniors took it, and they had taken it before then as we went. But they understood why. And we would share their progress with them. And we told them it was not about a grade. It's about, we need to know where your gaps are. So they really did help us tremendously with that. But again, it was looking at our standards and saying, what do these students have to have in every single science?
Right.
Then what was crazy was my school actually did a big PLC meeting, and we compared our standards to each other in terms of a basic how we did the comparison between departments, because that's got to be crazy, right? You're talking about math, and you're talking about English, the humanities and history, and all these different things going on, business, and we're at the high school level, so we're talking about all these different kinds of things. How do you get to where you have tools that would actually apply all the way across the board? And the tool that we actually found that worked the best was the claim evidence reasoning.
In all of your classes?
In all of them.
You love to hear it as a science teacher.
Which was crazy, because claim evidence reasoning does not mean exactly the same thing in the humanities that it does in the sciences. Okay. I mean, that goes without saying. So I'm going to say that. So
when you're writing a paper, it is like you're making, like any sort of paper you're writing, I feel like.
You're making some kind of statement, some kind of argument, right? Some kind of, this is what I think, thesis statement, whatever it is. And you do have to back it up with something.
Right.
Right. And then, so then there, of course, there's the rebuttal at the end of it. But what we did was we actually aligned in our science department. What we did was aligned claim evidence reasoning with the lab report. So your claim was really based on your outcome of your experiment. So it doesn't relate exactly to your hypothesis. So you'd have to do your hypothesis no matter what. But in terms of your results, you could throw a claim out there and then just go back and modify it like you would your hypothesis. Anyway, as we strolled through these other departments and looked at the claim, that's what popped up all over the place, was that they use some form of claim evidence reasoning. So we were, of course, thrilled to death that 60 staff members were essentially using the same kind of tool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how helpful is that for our 1,500 students, right?
Right. For
That's
the
pretty darn
consistency.
yes. And of course, they look a little bit different all the way along, but isn't life like that?
Right.
Your application of your skills looks different in
Mm-hmm.
each area of your life. So that the claims evidence reasoning, I feel really, in my opinion, really pushes the standards, because a lot of the NGSS standards ask students to make an argument for.
Right.
Hey, give me your evidence. Show me why you think this. Show me your understanding this way. So it just makes sense.
Well, and I love that you guys were collaborative and you did it together, because what I'm hearing from a lot of the teachers I'm talking to is figuring out, like, in some senses, it's way simpler to grade this way because there are only 4 numbers as opposed to 100 numbers. But in the
Yes.
other instance, teachers feel that they are being more biased because they're like, well, I think it's easy to say, okay, well, this is mastery, but how much grace do I give before then I say, well, now you're only a 3. And then kind of, because it's such a qualitative term that we're kind of putting on people as like, you're approaching, you've met it. We don't expect students to be perfect, but I think the tension lies with like teachers trying to use resources they already have, tests they already have, and apply it to standards-based grading. How do they know what is mastery, what's not quite? Or do you think it's like, no, you need to rewrite all your assessments?
Oh, I would never have them rewrite all their assessments. First of all, you're going to rewrite all your assessments your whole teaching life, because that's kind of what we do. We tweak them, so okay. But no, that's just daunting. No, what we did that helped a ton was, but it takes vulnerability, Becca. It takes you being willing as a teacher to kind of set your ego aside and be risky and put your assessments out there for others to look at.
Yeah.
And so what we did was, the first thing we did was we printed out all those darn standards for each of our departments, bio, and then physics, then chem. And because we went after the 3-course model, the NGSS
I was wondering, because I know
model.
some districts in California still
are doing 4.
Right. So I was wondering what y'all did.
And I think we should have done 4. And I think that's what we're rolling back to. I know that sounds funny,
but it's so hard at the high school level to integrate. Like, it's so hard.
It's so hard. Yes.
And then to switch them to senior year, take an AP class. It's like, what are we doing?
Yes, exactly.
Like, love it in theory, like obsessed, but just practically it's hard.
Practically speaking, it has been really hard, because our students almost all of my, real go-getters in science, they wanted to do exactly that, take their AP in their senior year. So,
and for me, as someone who doesn't like earth science teachers, I would be tortured to have earth science every year. Like, I was so excited. Yeah. I took earth space as a freshman, and then I was like, done, like not looking at it again,
Right.
So that would have been hard.
And that's what we're going back to, because there's, first of all, I'm a block teacher, so I taught from, and sorry, I just retired, so I still feel like I'm teaching. So I taught, from August to December, and then I had a whole new group of kids.
I love that.
But how deep into earth science am I going to be able to get with biology?
Right.
Are you kidding me? Okay,
right.
I've got 6 or 7 units in biology, and I'm going to crank through those puppies, but I have freshmen
I know
who don't know anything.
Right.
And they are coming in to us, I mean, just to validate, y'all, just borrowing your phraseology, your dialect, just to validate y'all, they are coming in a good additional 2 years behind now.
Right.
They are.
Anytime I read, someone sends me their integrated standards, I'm like, I don't know how to, I don't want to discourage them, but I'm like, I don't know how you're supposed to teach all this in 1 year, or especially if you're on block. Because as a teacher, I loved semester block because I love starting fresh in January. But like, I think I did the math once, and you lose it's like 80% of the actual time if you taught them. It's crazy. Like,
it's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. You cannot, I've always had to be selective on block. The only time I ever got through curriculum, through an entire curriculum, I was teaching at a charter school and I was able to teach them their science for an entire year.
Mm.
And I had award-winning science students too out of that.
It
I
makes a
mean,
huge difference.
if
Yeah.
given a chance, we could,
I
but
know.
in block you can't go there. So, like you, I love getting those fresh faces. I think it's so fun we get to start again and new people and all that.
Well, and for me, getting to learn from my mistakes and get like 2 tries in a year almost. Like I feel like you get
Hmm.
double the experience almost because you're teaching start
Yes.
to finish twice, you know? And like you said, like you have a terrible test or you have to rewrite the whole thing or lab bombs, like already get a couple months later, you get another chance, which is
Yeah.
nice.
So this is to kind of sum it up in terms of what my team did. We agreed on 5 main standards that were just critical to their understanding of science. Each one of us did in our particular area of science. Now that was an arbitrary number. You guys decide what, if you're going to use this strategy, you decide as a team and do it as a team because you need those heads bouncing off of each other in terms of what kids really need to know. You don't want to under give them content, but overarching concepts, what's the most important thing? What are the five standards we just gotta make sure they know? One of ours was cell theory. They needed to know DNA. They need to know not cell theory, but they need to know
Central dogma.
essential dogma. Thank you so much because the words were right there. Thank
I
you
knew
for
what
reading
you
my
meant.
brain. They need to know central dogma. They need to know basically how their body system works. Not huge, but they need to know. I mean, just things like that in biology, basic ecological principles.
Hmm.
And so you decide those, and then what you do is you teach to those,
Mm.
and you do it as much thematically as you can
Hmm.
because students love stories. Our brain loves a story. And NGSS has it right in that they give you examples of how the story could travel through the different grade levels. It's not one you're going to be able to use. I'm going to just tell you, you're going to have to make up your own stories because the dynamics and the culture and what our kids understand
Bonnie, I have
changes.
said this so much. I have so many people who ask, like, okay, you love NGSS. Why don't you have storyline based curriculum? And I'm like, because the whole reason a story works is when you do one that you are passionate about or your students are passionate of, and
Yes.
you're telling the story the whole time. Like
Yep.
you're weaving it in and you can weave it into like anything. Like, I don't need to
Anything.
give you a story. It's so
Right.
like, I'm like, I totally hear what you're saying there. Cause
Yes.
I try to give people ideas, but I'm like, no, you need to like take ownership of this. You've got to facilitate the discussion and like
Yes.
you know,
And so that you can 6 units down say, now remember when Joe was running
yes.
and he collapsed and there was a fire nearby and a lot of smoke. Now, what
Mhm.
do you think? I mean, like you said, the integration of the storyline, whatever the story is. I told stories all the time and they pretty much were mostly true. I
Mhm.
mean, you get them from your real life.
Yeah.
I live with big dogs. I have grandchildren. People get sick. They
Oh,
they have challenges in life, all that other stuff. There's so much fun. You can tell some great stories.
it was great when I mean when we had our infertility and I was going through all of this fertility
Oh,
testing. I mean, I was
mhm.
like I was the storyline for anatomy. Like, but it really was
Absolutely.
so helpful because I had like legit experiences to be like, let's talk about this, or whatever, and it was so helpful.
Well, I raised rats in my classroom, and I had my girlfriend next door who taught sped. She had the females, I had the males. And one night a male broke out and got into her
No.
cages. And so what we decided is we would have a wedding, which we did for her little K through thirds and my seventh and eighth graders at the time. And we did a population, genetics on it. We did colors. I mean, it
Mm.
was perfect. And those kids were they were engaged. And then of course Mice aren't, it's not a straight up, you're this color and you're that color and you come out maybe a mix or, no, they're more complex than that, which made it way fun, of course, because then their predictions would be just shot all to hell. And then, I'm sorry, shot all to heck. And then they'd have to, really rethink it. And we'd have a deeper discussion about how genes work. And actually, the genetics of eye color, now we've identified up to 18 genes that affect our eye color, which is why we get such variation.
Right. Which is awesome.
Which is awesome.
I feel like one of the things, and I have all these questions for my audience I need to get your opinion on, but
yes, let's get to them.
I feel like what I'm hearing too, though, is you like, one, this is super collaborative. And two, it really requires a lot of humility as a teacher. Like for me, I'm the type of teacher that's like, I want a checklist. I want to just I don't have that flexibility. And I feel like the older I get, the more I realize you have to just do what's best for your students and be flexible to do that. And I was so stressed about the EOC, and about their grades. And I think that's one thing that makes me so interested in standards-based grading is taking some of that pressure off.
Yes.
Like, let's focus on learning and assessing what the students know and can do. And then you only have to pick from 4 options in terms of how you're going to label them. But I would love to hear, like, how did students reply to this and how did parents reply when you all started doing this? And I know you said it was kind of crazy in the beginning because you did both, but maybe as time went on and did you all switch to just doing standards-based or have you always continued to have 2 reports?
Actually, at that school, and I taught there another 5 years, I think we did both report cards up to the time that I left, and that was in 2010. And then the next place I taught was a little charter, and we did standards-based reporting there. So I was actually really happy with that because I didn't have to really bump up against, why does this look like this and this looks like this? So to respond to, here's the big challenge with standards-based reporting, is not so much anymore because you've got millennials coming up and a lot of them actually have been exposed probably to standards-based reporting. But as parents, they still have in their heads the old traditional, that we still are fighting that. And I just say that from the standpoint of they want to understand holistically how their child is doing. So you need to figure out how to address that.
Right.
You can tell them in terms of content, your child's doing great. They're, test percentages are that they're getting the information, their projects, they're applying the information, their essay, whatever the feedback you're getting. You, of course, need to use multiple assessments, use authentic assessments along with your regular, testing and weekly quizzes so that you can show parents where they're struggling and where they're doing well. But then you need to be able to address the behaviors, the discipline, the work ethic of the student, because parents want to know those things.
Right.
Probably the best way that we did that would be our initial parent-teacher conferences. We did an initial parent-teacher conference. We did it in the gym. It was, teacher sat there and her students rolled through. They had a particular time. They and the parent were supposed to show up. This was done actually at a charter here. Big charter. Well known, really a good charter. And it was wild. It was lovely. Because what happened is that parent talked to all 5 teachers or 4 teachers within an hour's time frame and got a holistic picture of their student. Because I could say what's happening in Johnny's class, what Johnny's doing in his class, but I don't know what he's doing out here unless I'm out here.
Mm-hmm.
And how many of us are?
Mm-hmm.
We hide in our classrooms just working our little butts off for all we're worth. So arena conferencing is what we've called it, is one of the ways that we address that. And then the other way is just to communicate with parents basically separately. This is what I see.
Mm-hmm.
you have to, there's nothing standardized that I know of. There's no reporting tool that we have developed yet that I know that can give parents that additional piece that traditional report cards gave us. And I think that's the reason that the school that I just retired from, we were doing traditional.
You went back to
Yeah.
traditional.
Yeah. And I was doing standard-based grading because I had to. That was the way I was trained. So it was, did they master the standard? And I'm looking at my DC eyes. I'm just looking at all my NGSS standards and did they meet these? Did they not? And so we had rubrics that told us basically mastery, proficient, basic, and then below basic, basically. I mean,
Yeah.
that's all you need to know. The student has got this hands down, can do it in their sleep, or they just don't have it. And the whole department graded to that because it was, and I'm not going to lie, I created my own tests and I graded on a curve.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I did grade on a curve because I know I have a tendency to make my tests really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to see that application at level 1, level 2, level 3. I want to see you really push that. What do you really know? However, if the whole entire class did 60%, I know that's me. That's not
Right.
them. Okay.
Right.
So I have to make adjustments for that. But as long as I looked at my standard and didn't water that down, then me grading on a curve is no big deal.
Right.
Okay. As long as those individual questions still address the standard and at the level you're expecting to see, you're good. Just take out the bad questions because trust me, there are bad questions.
Yes. I had a really great high school chemistry teacher who I've had on the podcast several times. And I remember he would throw out questions a lot because of the same reason. Like you realize like, okay, yeah, that wasn't fair. Or,
Yeah, that was poorly worded. That was, from what they got from me,
right.
I see how they answered that.
Right.
And I always encourage my students to challenge me because of those things. And I would say, bring me your evidence, bring it up, bring your case.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you'll never incur any wrath from me
Yeah.
if you do that because I'm so human.
Boni, you're so humble and gracious. Like I want to be that way and I'm so not. And so I'm trying to figure out too, like, I feel like you're just like taking stuff in stride, which I love. But like, again, for someone like me, type A, I don't want to grade kids on behavior. Like I know that's wrong, but at the same time, it's very motivating for some kids. So how are you getting them to do work, those kids that just don't care, especially if they're like, well, it's just like I'm on this rubric reporting system. So like I'm not motivated by like a 10-point grade here or there because it doesn't matter.
Right. I'm going to say to you, this is going to be the baseline of any challenge you have with any student, and that is the relationship that you have developed with them.
Yes.
And my most challenging students, and they've been a fair mix of both female and male, they almost to the person, they need to be seen and heard. So then it's incumbent upon us to do our homework. And I'm not asking you to look up the background for 34 children. I'm not asking you that. But I'm asking you to look a little deeper in or talk to the counselor of that one child that says, I don't care. School doesn't matter to me. Because I've certainly had enough life experience to tell you, Rebecca, that when children are in survival mode, school means nothing. They can't engage. They aren't capable. And to the best of our ability, we need to give them grace and mercy and try to lift them, even when they say, I don't want to be lifted. Well, I don't care. We all get like that. But try to lift them with options, okay, so I can make this. How about if we turn this into a project? And you have to find out about your student. You need to know a little bit about them.
Right.
So the first couple weeks of block schedule, it felt real crazy because it's a lot of time in a block.
Mm-hmm.
But I would spend the first 2 full days for sure just finding out who they are.
Mm.
And that would be, I have this thing I put around the room. In fact, I bought it, I think, off of Teachers Pay Teachers, but it's a great classroom intro. And really what it does is it asks students how they want their classroom to be. What's your
Mm.
ideal classroom look like? What do you need out of your teacher? Basic, those kinds of things. And from that, I would develop agreements. They came up with agreements, and I did this all the way through the high school level. I learned it in an underperforming school in a training in New Mexico on an Indian reservation.
Wow.
But it applied. It applied to my middle school, and it applied way across the board to my high school. So it's about relationship. It is not something I told one of my favorite subs, and I had to fire her. She was my principal's daughter too. It was terrible, just because of the way she was treating my students. And I had what I basically said to her at the time, and I say to anyone, you set the tone.
Mm.
It's your job to set the tone. They're children. It's not their job. It's not their job to meet you where you're at. It's your job to meet them where they're at.
Yes, that's a good word.
And yes, that's hard with 34 students. I totally, and I'm saying using that number because that's how many I had in my science classrooms. And yes, we did labs with 34. Yes, we did. I did AP with 32.
Oh my, I can't imagine the grading.
Oh, it was horrific. I had 2 beautiful TAs that just saved my butt.
TAs are the most underutilized.
Everything.
Literally, I tell everyone, I'm like, this is a free way your admin can support you. And then kids like to put it on their resume. Like I was
a teacher's assistant,
and it's volunteer hours, 0 credits, but yeah, they love it. That I was a TA in high school, and then luckily every school I've taught in has had that program. I'm like, I don't know how I would have done it. Like you get so much of those menial tasks and things off your plate. So
it saved me.
You mentioned like you've used other existing resources. I know you've used some of my It's Not Rocket Science ones. That's how we got connected.
Oh, I sure have. Yeah.
So how do you because I interviewed someone else about standards-based grading, and she's only been teaching 5 years. It's kind of been her whole career. So it's different because that's all she's ever known. But like for someone like you, so experienced, I know it was a good bit of your career, but like, this is a fear a lot of people have, is how do you take existing things you use and really use them with standards-based grading?
Well, I don't know if you're familiar with, most people are, backwards design.
Yeah, UBD, understanding by design or whatever.
UBD, exactly, understanding by design. Okay, so I have used UBD pretty much most of my life, my teaching life. And what understanding by design really does is it just makes you focus on the standard as you decide what content you're going to be presenting and how you're going to present it. And read your darn standards. You will find that most of what you have is usable. You're not going to have to rewrite your entire assessments. If all you've been doing is A, B, C, D, E, F, and your district is saying, we're in the standards, and by now, 10 years later, we need to be, we should be teaching to those standards, all of us. Don't be afraid of the standards. Don't be afraid to just read what it says. And that's all it says. The standards are great about saying, stop here.
Assessment boundary.
I don't have to teach the Krebs cycle. I don't have to teach it.
Right.
And if you're teaching the Krebs cycle to your students, first of all, most of them will never need it unless they're going into medicine or biology. And you're wasting your own time and theirs. Why would you do that? So look at your standards and see where it stops. See what's expected. It's not as scary as you think. And our resources, if they were anything, they were too much. That's what I'm going to tell you. So you're going to have too much resources, and you will have too much for your lesson plan, and you will only be able to get through so much. So make sure you're clear on the standard you're addressing.
which is great because it's so much easier to edit than to come up with from scratch. So it's like, okay, now you can just trim things out and it's what's interesting is like there are some things not in the standards, like you said, like gas laws is not really explicitly in the chemistry standards of NGSS PS, but like gas laws are awesome and they cover so many things. So many of us are still just choosing to teach them because like it brings in so many other contexts. And I think that's where it's like, that's where NGSS is great in that it isn't as specific as some people would like and are used to, but that's the beauty of the flexibility.
Rigid.
Yeah.
Rigid. It's just not as rigid as the old standards. Yes.
Oh my gosh. I mean, my first year teaching our South Carolina state standards were like, it would have a standard and then there'd be like 8 to 12 objectives that were like, so define cell. Like it was so specific, which was like, as a first year teacher was great. But now I'm like so grateful for NGSS and that flexibility, like you said, to make those decisions.
And to, have the content and then be able to parse out, oh, these are the science, practices we're using, and these are the engineering practices we're actually using.
Mm-hmm.
And to make students aware of those things. So they're thinking about their thinking all the time, and that we use these, and stressing to them that we use the SEPs in every science.
And the CCCs. I'm like, I feel like people stress about it, but I'm like, I don't even think about CCCs because we're just doing it. Like if you're doing science, like you're doing it. So
yes, you are.
Hopefully it's not too stressful, but
see, it's the old myth, really, and I think it's a myth because it was never my experience, that science teachers don't do writing, don't do humanities. Well, one of the ways I hook my kids is to hook them into the history of something,
right?
Or to talk about things like the Black Plague. Come on,
right?
And then chemistry, gas laws. Oh my gosh, why wouldn't you? Because gas laws are going to affect them their whole lives.
Right.
Our atmosphere is all about gas laws. Come on. So yeah, they do give you a lot of flexibility. They also allow us to bring current science in. Just had a great article from National Geographic. Here's a free plug for them. It's the most just got it in my mail, and they're talking about our climate again. And it's just, if you have an understanding of what the greenhouse effect is and the fact that we exist because there is a greenhouse effect, then you are better able to, judge and read media and say, well, that's probably garbage because I know what gas laws are and that makes no sense, or I know what percentage this is and that is and that is, and that makes no sense. I mean, we need our students to be educated. We need them to know these things. Anyway, I think
you don't have to teach.
Went off somewhere.
Right. Like you don't have to teach about global warming because if you teach the greenhouse effect and how life can exist,
they're going to get it. Yes.
Then it's just, then the data's there,
The data's the data's there. And that's probably the biggest area where there is need, is them being able to read and interpret data. And I heavily suggest, it's pretty much required as far as I know, that every student takes statistics, because as much as challenging as that class is, it will help them so much determine what's real and what's not out there in terms of information.
Well, and I very recently had a good friend send me an article about something, and it's a very controversial topic, so I'm not even going to bring it up what it was, but they were like, look at this data. And I looked at it. First thing I did, I looked at the sample size. 34 people was the sample size.
Oh, no. Yes.
And I said, game over.
Oh, my gosh. Yes.
If you don't teach your students that that's an absurd sample size.
Right. It means nothing.
Right. The scientific literacy.
Let's just do the United States. That's 330 million people. Do you want those 34 people to represent you?
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah. I've taught, that's part of the basics of science that I teach is, what is your sampling size? What are you really looking at? We're using 3 plants here and 3 plants there, but in reality, Mendel did thousands of plants.
Right.
thousands of trials to see what was going to be happening before he came up with it. So anyway, yeah.
I love that. Okay. Well, before I ask you our last question, is there anything else you wanted to say? I don't want to cut you off. So is there any other tips or anything else you want to say and make sure people hear who are listening to this and they're teaching NGSS using standards-based reporting or grading? What would you want them to know?
I would just say be patient with your parents. Just make sure that they understand that if their child is far below basic, but they're getting a C in your class, it's probably because they're working like a dog and their behavior is beautiful and they need more support. Could be EL support. It could be they need to be tested, could be a number of things. But to explain to a parent that all the standards-based does is tell us where your child is at in understanding these standards, science standards, English standards, whatever they are, and that they can always go forward and improve.
Yes.
It's none of it. It's a fluid document is what I tell them. And that's how those situations can occur, because those are probably the most challenging conversations I have with a parent when their child is getting A's on all their homework and A's on their in-class work because they're getting help from peers. And then they get to tests and they can't pass them. So then that's when we put in tutoring help, extra support, come see me after class, whatever that is. So that's the most difficult conversation is, they're not an A student because they're doing all these things beautifully. And if I could just give them an A for effort, I sure would.
But that won't serve them, right?
That's not going to serve them. No.
Well, and I think you really hit the nail on the head too at the beginning when you said having those face-to-face conferences early on.
Yes,
I always try to encourage teachers a lot. Like my first couple of years in the classroom, I just didn't want to ever talk to a parent because they were scary. And then I got to a private school and they were like, you must do this. And then I made it my goal, how early on can I meet with everyone face to face? Because I think when they see you're a human, as opposed to an email address, they just treat you so differently, and they see on your face and in your voice how you care about their actual student.
And that's it. That is what happens. That's what comes across to parents. And that sets you up so much for success, because then when you send an email and say, little Johnny pushed little Jill over in the chair today, do you think you could come in and sit here for 1 or 2 days? They go, yeah, I'm on it.
Right.
And they want to support you.
Yeah. I mean, I even think of my son. I mean, my oldest is just now in kindergarten, so I'm barely a parent of a student, but I don't know. I was kind of about the teacher at first, in the communication. I was doesn't feel, but I was my husband was don't be critical. You're being critical because you're a teacher. But then we had that first conference because it was required at our elementary school. And it was so clear that she knew my son. And it instantly softened my heart to her. A couple of things, I'm you know him. In your, your mass messages, I'm do you even know my kid? But you do. And when parents see their kid, it just makes all the difference.
Yeah, it makes all the difference. Yeah.
Okay. My last question for every guest is there any way that you've simplified your life recently? Because I would love to hear.
You mean as far as teaching goes?
It could be teaching. It could be at home. It could be something you've started doing, something you've started saying no to, maybe you stopped doing something. It could be a life hack, an organizational tool. It could be anything, any way that you've simplified your life in or outside of the classroom recently.
Oh, you're going to hate this. I don't make a list. See, I have retired and I do have projects that I have in progress. But for each day, I kind of take the day as it comes. It simplifies my stress levels. I don't, Sunday night, I still feel a little bit of that anxiety on Sunday night.
Sunday scaries.
Sunday scaries. And it's so funny because I'll catch myself. No, what I want to do actually with that question is really back up something that you have said and done a podcast on. That's that I dropped homework. I dropped assigning homework, and I did it It was before the pandemic. So I want to say that it was probably 2018, maybe as late as 2019. And it was your information, your reasoning that actually made me really look at it. So how I handle that with my adolescents, with my high school students, is right at the beginning of the term. I'm just straight up with them and I tell them, I'm not going to assign homework. And of course I get, yay, we love you. You're our favorite teacher. They just think that's marvelous. And then I say, well, here are the conditions. Okay. The work that you get in class has to be finished and it has to be turned in. And if it's not finished in class, then it needs to be turned in the following day. And that will be technically homework because you are going to finish it at home or after school or in tutoring or whatever. The exception to that are projects, long-term projects. And so I'd be very specific about that. And of course, I always gave them class time for projects as well.
Right.
So it's not like they had no time. And labs. Lab write-up, we do the lab, but then the lab write-up was usually due the day after or 2 days after. But beyond that, I gave them no homework. I'm kind of a flipped classroom gal, and so I showed them a fair amount of video clips to really punch in concepts, short direct lecture, 10 minutes, basically. Then boom, I'm on an activity that started applying what they were just in or, and then walk around and help them. And that's the dropping the homework just absolutely changed my life. I'm going to tell you. In fact, It makes me a little choked up because, like most of you, I worked till midnight. I worked till 10, 11, 12. When I had kids at home, it was so hard because I couldn't even touch anything till they were in bed.
Right.
Because they deserve your time. They deserve your attention. They deserve your momminess, your parenting. And I didn't feel their homework was effective. It felt almost punitive at times, like I was chasing down a rabbit hole all the time. And what a terrible waste of my energy and theirs.
Right.
So allowing more time in class, which is essentially what I did on my end to help them individually. That was one aspect of it. The other one was I said to them, you have to step up. You have to crank through this work while you're in front of me so I can help you. Otherwise, you're getting homework because I need you to get this content.
Right.
So they stepped up for the most part.
It's such a helpful life skill too, now that especially so many jobs are virtual and at home. And it's like, and you're not paid to work a 9 to 5, you're paid to get a result. And so you're training them to, I don't care if it takes you 10 minutes to do it or, if you can get it, great, so I think it really serves them, but it really serves you too.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you seriously so much for your time. I'm really grateful and I'm excited for my listeners to get to learn from you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I so appreciate it. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode and my conversation with Boni. You can find a summary of this episode in the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 107. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.